Okay, folks. Thank you all for coming back so promptly. It's the last session of the day. I think the exercise you just did there, folks. Right, okay. The exercise that you just did there, I think, kind of created quite a lot of discussion, and certainly a lot of it was about, well, how is this relevant to what I'm doing in my classroom now, which is exactly the intention of that. You can sort of, yeah, I can see what this means, but it's not terribly relevant to my practice and what I'm doing. The model that I like when I'm thinking about teaching, and I think it kind of reflects what I'm doing, and I'm just going to share that with you, and you can see how relevant it is to your own, is by a guy called Phil Race, who was a lecturer in chemistry and physical sciences in the UK. He's just recently retired. I'm going to share the chapter one of his toolkit book onto the virtual learning environment with you. It's very easily to read, and certainly in your task where you've got to do annotated bibliography, I think he would be a very useful starting point. So he decided, or he came up with this idea, that at the heart of anybody undertaking any kind of learning, they either want to learn something or they need to learn something. And we spoke a little bit there about when we're taking a strategic approach because we need to learn this to get to the next level. And it's amazing how powerful those driving forces are in terms of learning. Any of you that have small children or nieces or nephews or what have you will maybe be familiar with this idea that from a very small age, 2 or 3 year old child can memorise hundreds of names of dinosaurs, or sorry, hundreds of different exaggeration, but many different types of dinosaurs, what they eat, who they interact with, you know, whether they're carnivore or a herbivore. And they can read off all of these names very fluently. And they just have this real passion. There's something that really fires them up about dinosaurs and gives them a real passion for learning. One of my children struggled to read. He had dyslexia, he has dyslexia. And one of the ways of kind of trying to help him develop his reading was his reading age was below his kind of intellectual age, if you like. So the books he wanted to read, the stories he wanted to read, were too complex for him to actually be able to read them. So the model was that we'd read a chapter, and of course the Harry Potter books were the ones that we started with, where he would read the first paragraph of the chapter, and then I would read it to the end. So you got that kind of, the story was moving on, but he was reading more and more complex language. And of course, as we progressed, he would read the paragraph and then he'd read a page or maybe 1 or 2 pages before I finished the chapter. And then, as I was increasingly working away with the Higher Education Academy, he was becoming increasingly frustrated that he wanted to get to the next chapter or the next part of the book, but I wasn't there to help him read it. And so suddenly his reading skills developed in leaps and bounds, because he'd had that kind of initial step to support his development, and now his need to learn, his need to find out what's happening in the story kind of overcome, so it drove him forward to learn more. So you have that idea that you either need to learn something strategically to help you go to the next step, or you're completely passionate about a subject and you want to learn it. And I think here we can also see our dichotomy between our deep learners and our strategic learners perhaps as well. From that initial wanting and needing, you actually have to do something. So if you want to find out what the next part of the story is, you need to read, you actually then have to pick up the book and do it. So there has to be some kind of idea of actually doing, or whether it's a physical task, a practical task, or a cognitive task, you actually have to do something. And then, having done something, the next step in learning is this kind of idea of taking time out for a bit of sense making. And you'll see in these workshops that I'll give you some active tasks to do, and then a little bit of opportunity to have a discussion, and then some time to make your own notes and to reflect on what you've learned in that period. So there's a bit of sense making. There's some time allocated then for you to make some sense of what it is that you're learning. When you think about this program as a whole, this is going to be a very intensive week, and then hopefully over the next 6 weeks before I come back again you'll have a period of kind of doing stuff, putting into practice what we've been talking about in these classes and making sense of it. This can be, sense making can be a solitary experience. You can be doing it on your own, or you can be doing it within the classroom. But it's so important, and I think certainly, I suppose the direction of travel that I'm seeing in the UK sector is we're squeezing out this bit of period where students actually can sit and make sense of what it is that they're learning. We move from one module to the next very quickly, and there's not that time. Part of sense making, once you've done something and tried to make sense of it yourself, there's opportunities to get feedback. And it's quite interesting in this model that the feedback comes here actually before the assessment. So you can give students feedback on how they're making sense of what they're doing. And that's what we're thinking about in terms of formative assessment, which we'll talk more about on Friday. But students need feedback on how they're understanding a topic. So you can think about that in a classroom environment where they've done a task, they've had a discussion, they've maybe fed back to or commented to the class about their understanding, and you in the class are then giving them feedback immediately. So that feedback can take many different forms depending on the task that they're doing. But here students are perhaps doing a calculation, and the tutor's coming around and giving them feedback on their work there. So the task would have been doing the calculations and making sense of the theory that maybe has just been expounded to them, and the tutor's there giving feedback. Although there's not been actually any assessment at this stage. It can also just be, supporting while they're doing practical tasks. I know many of you do college and practical disciplines. Again, giving that feedback within that teaching environment. So feedback doesn't have to be something that happens after summative assessment. It's something that can be happening or should be happening all the way through. The next idea is verbalising. Okay, being able to talk about your understanding of the topic. And this can be, in a very social environment where your students can chat to each other after the class about some concepts. It can be within the class, and this kind of peer-supported and peer-assessed learning within the classroom environment gives students that really important opportunity to verbalise, to discuss what the concept is, what their understanding is. You've all been doing that all the way through today, having that opportunity to discuss what does this mean to me, is it the same as what it means to you, can we learn something from our joint understanding or our shared understanding. And I think the far extension of that obviously is teaching that concept to others. So, if I actually ask one of you to get up and explain there's different learning paradigms, what's the difference between humanism and constructivism, or humanism and behaviourism, you would, if you could get up and explain those, I would feel that you had a really deep understanding of that topic. And then finally, on the outer ring of this is assessment. Okay, and the reason why Phil has put assessment as this outer boundary is because he feels that assessment drives all of learning. It tells the students what is important. And so we have to think very, very clearly about those things that we're assessing, because that sends a very clear signal to the students. I'm assessing this because this is an important thing for you to know, understand, be able to do. And that therefore triggers what they spend their time doing. Whether they're strategic learners or whether they're deep learners, they will still focus on what you're asking them to do in terms of assessment. So the assessment is in that outer circle, because that is driving all of this learning. This is called the ripples model, and you can see why, because everything ripples out from this inner wanting, needing to learn, but the assessment drives the learning back forward again, back into the centre. Does this model resonate with you? Does that make sense to you? Does that kind of capture some of your what you see in your classroom? Does anybody want to comment on that?
verbalizing part is missing in the Turkish education system.
Yeah.
Maybe we can focus on that.
Okay, I think that's interesting. So in your classes, there's not many opportunities for students to teach through courses?
Yeah, I always tell them to come after the class to my room, we can talk about it, but they don't desire for it. So
okay, so they don't come after class, and what about in class? Do you do much
after class, yeah, we have some little chats, but maybe we can more.
Yeah, and then in the class, actually in the class, do you encourage discussion about topics within the class when you're teaching?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they do have that opportunity then to verbalise, yeah. Okay. That's
Scientists today take advantage of that opportunity.
Okay, good.
Generally they don't.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's, we're so focused on what we've got to say and getting to the end of what we've got to say that actually giving students the opportunity to talk about it themselves, it helps them understand it a little bit better, helps them remember it a little bit better, it helps them contextualise it in their own words. It's so important. Anything else? Anybody else want to comment on this model? Does this kind of reflect what you see in practice? Yes, no? In my kind of, from my own teaching practice, I really see this a lot, and I kind of, that kind of approach kind of resonates with me much more than kind of the learning paradigm or theories, that we can read about. But as particularly, I think particularly the part of the middle, that unless students either want or need to learn something, they're not going to learn. But also recognising that this assessment is kind of setting the direction of travel there as well. Okay, the last part of what we're going to think about today, I will share this first chapter from Phil's book where he talks about this model. So when if you need to have an evidence-informed approach when you're talking about your own practice, if this kind of resonates with you, then that would be a source to go to say this is the evidence. What I find with many people when they're writing their accounts of practice is that's the first time they actually look at the pedagogic literature and they go, oh yeah, actually I was doing that, and you kind of can retrofit the model to your practice. But I think in some ways that means that the model is true because it is kind of what you're doing, but even if you didn't know about it before you were doing it. So don't feel guilty about that. I think many people take that approach. Okay, so the last part of what we're going to talk about today is the sort of levels of learning, and I think you're all kind of familiar with using the different taxonomies within your teaching. Different learning taxonomy. Would that be true? Okay, right. No, right. Okay, so I'll talk about this a bit more, and then you can tell me stuff that you know or want more information. So this afternoon we've talked about some different theories about how learning happens. Okay, so we've talked about different learning paradigms. I've showed you this other model of Phil Race's, the Ripple model. We've talked about how students learn in terms of their approaches to learning and their learning styles. We need to now start thinking about what it is that we want students to learn. Okay? And when we start thinking about what we want students to learn, you guys earlier on today were thinking about creating syllabi and modular or course outlines, course content and what have you. But when you create that, I think it's so important to start off with this question is, why do students need to learn this? Okay. Sometimes it's set by professional bodies and outside, board of dentistry for yourself perhaps, or professional engineers might set what it is that they want students to learn. Other times you might have a bit more flexibility. And then the next question is, when do they need to learn this? Do they need to learn all of this in the first year, or do they need to learn this in the second year, third year, final year? And that is an important question that sometimes we don't kind of think. And certainly when you work in course teams or program teams, working out, who's teaching what where, and making sure that there's a logical kind of structure to what students are learning across your programs. And where will they learn this? Will they learn this by listening to you? Will they learn this at home? Will they learn this using virtual learning environments or online, in laboratory classes? So that kind of wider learning environment, again, is something that we need to think about. All of this leads to learning outcomes, which is actually part of this module 2, actually writing learning outcomes. But I think it's useful just to kind of mention that this is where these things are going. But to develop learning outcomes, you need to have an understanding of the levels of learning in terms of what level that students are trying to attain. Oops. So I'm not going to talk too much about intended learning outcomes, because as I say, that's part of module 2. But these are what students should be able to do after any piece of learning. So you'll see that there was learning outcomes for this course this week, which are in your handbook. Learning outcomes are all usually expressed as a verb, and they're related to the level of the programme. So this is what we're going to focus on for the last part of this afternoon. There's learning taxonomies which have been developed to help us classify learning. So again, it's this idea of getting a shared understanding of what students should be learning at different levels of their programme. So what they should be learning at the first year of their programme compared to the final year of the programme. The best learning outcomes are expressed from the student's perspective. So it gives them ownership of it, what they expect to gain from undertaking a piece of learning. The learning outcomes are then related to your assessment tasks and your assessment criteria. If those things aren't connected, then it's very difficult to know whether you've achieved the learning outcomes or not. And so this is the whole idea of constructive alignment, which we'll talk about in module 2. Can you put your hand up if you know all about constructive alignment? Yeah. Okay, good. That makes the next module very... if we go back up this list, put your hand up if you've heard of learning outcomes. Yes, do you all have to write learning outcomes for your courses? Yes, okay, so we all know what learning outcomes are. Do you know that they have to be written around a verb? Yes? Good. Okay. And you've heard of learning taxonomy? Yes? Yes, okay. And then these other ones are really module 2 stuff, so that's not too important. That's why I just kind of want to know where you're at, so I'm not telling you stuff you already know, and I'm not going off in a different direction. So the only thing that you're not familiar with then is this kind of aligning your learning activities to the learning outcomes. Is that right? Yes? Or you are familiar with this last one? You are? Everybody else? Everybody else? Okay, well, we'll explore that more in module 2. So the typical learning taxonomy that's used in higher education is Bloom's taxonomy, and is this, do you all use this for your... Yes. Yeah, good. Okay, so the general idea is that as students progress through their degree course, they should have increasingly higher order learning skills. So you should have more of these in the final year, third year or fourth year of your degree program, and in the first year and the second year you should have more of these. Now that doesn't mean that you can't have these earlier on. It's just the predominance of the learning should be in these lower order skills. I'm not going through this if you're all very familiar with it, so we're just going through from remembering, understanding, applying, analysing, evaluating, and then creating and opportunity to create something new. You'll have these slides, but this is just a different way of looking at it. It's kind of, which I think in some ways is quite nice, because the triangular, the traditional triangular mode kind of makes them seem, very hierarchical and distinct. Right, I've done with remembering, I can now move on to understanding, I can now move on to the next one. Whereas I think the circular diagram actually kind of encapsulates the fact that, you're still having to do remembering, that's still at the heart of some of these higher things. You can't just ignore that because we're looking at the higher skills. Implicit in that is that you have to understand the core concept. And then there's just some language here and some different verbs that you can use at different levels. So there are many other taxonomies available, and I've added to the virtual learning environment this document from University College Dublin, which is a guide on taxonomies. And there it's kind of looking at different approaches because Bloom's has kind of almost been adopted wholesale, and there's a lot of issues with it. That, there's these sort of distinct chunks of learning, and in some ways it's a little bit false and a little bit kind of I don't know, I finished doing all the understanding, and now I'm going to move on to applying that understanding to something else. So it's a little bit sort of stepwise. So there has been some criticism of it, but it is so kind of pervasive. So one of the other, has any of you used the Solo taxonomy? And I've forgotten what Solo stands for, something structured, something learning outcomes. So in this model, basically here is where you don't know anything, known as pre-structural, and then it goes through these different phases. So you've basically got these 4 phases. But actually, I think it's simple if we look at it in this way. So in the unistructural thing, pre-structural, you don't know anything about the rest of the topic. Here you know one thing. Here you know lots of things, but they're not necessarily, you don't know how they connect. When you get to the relational level, you know lots of things, but you know how they connect together or relate to each other. And then extended abstract, you now can apply those things that you know how they relate together, and you can apply them to a new situation. So this model kind of, in some ways, is easier, certainly can be easier for students to understand, and it can be easier for us to think about our courses, even if we're kind of required to go back to a Bloom's model. You can kind of think about this sort of taxonomy first, and then maybe kind of fit what you require back to Bloom. Because this seems to be, certainly to me, is slightly more intuitive. So verbs using Solo in the unistructural mode, sort of name and identify, describe and list becomes sort of more multi-structural, relational, compare, explain and justify, and then hypothesize and reflect once you get to those higher levels. So it's a similar kind of approach. You end up with the verbs that kind of describe what the students are doing. But this is really just to highlight that there are different approaches to Bloom. One woman band to kind of not have Bloom as being a kind of monopoly in all learning taxonomies. But the document that describes all of that is available to you. And certainly when you're reflecting or you're practical or you're writing your annotated bibliography, you might want to have a look at that. The UCD document is very easy to read. It's kind of like an easy little start, so it kind of goes through it in a very, very straightforward way, and certainly give you more references if you need those. You can compare and think about those different approaches and which one's more appropriate to your practice. So what I want to do, a very last little task, and we're going to have a bit of fun. Each of your groups, you're going to get up and work with somebody else for the last task of the day. So each of your groups just split into groups of 3 and swap with another table. So maybe if the ones on the outside were in small groups, so you down to only 3 in your group now. Okay, so you'll just be 1, 3, and you're only in 3. So you guys can work with each other. And what have we got over there? 5 of you. And we've got a big group here. And how many is in this team? So you guys split up a group of 3 and swap with these guys. Yes, actually you'll have to swap with one of these and one of you swap with there. So rotate around.